We are here. We are back for the episode two recap of the Ultimate Fighter season 32. An eventful episode that has to be said. Obviously, teams were picked last week. The fights went down last week. We had Roddy Roots versus Guillermo Torres. Obviously, Roddy Roots took home the win last week. Coming into this week, Theo, we were expecting to see Omran Shaban, and as the episode kicked off, actually, before we get into the episode, we have to talk about the house drama rating. A big fat zero again, Theo. No drama in the house as of yet. Early days when it comes to house drama. Everybody's still in the competition, not being led astray. But no drama again this week in the house.
Yeah, I thought we were about to get maybe a little something when
Yeah.
Shaban's sitting outside and Magomedov's just like across the yard to them, and they're kind of looking at him from a distance, but not really saying anything, and you can feel that tension in the house. We are a little bit early into this, like you said, so you kind of got to wait for that stuff to build up as the tension and the animosity in the air builds up in the house. We're gonna have more stuff popping off, so maybe, and we'll see. The more guys who lose that are out of the tournament, maybe the more the liquor cabinet gets opened up, the more reckless people will get. So hopefully that heats up soon. But otherwise, I'm enjoying this season a lot more than I thought it would, Ian. It's pretty good so far.
It might not be the coolest thing to say, but I actually am enjoying it as well. And maybe it's because we made the time ourselves to preview it and look more closely in it. Maybe we're more connected to the guys that are in the house, but I like the characters that are in there so far. And I have been enjoying it. I had a sense of anticipation for the fight this week, obviously, with Omran due to fight Magomedov. And then, on the build up to each fight in last episode as well, I was pretty excited too. But we were sold wolf tickets. We were sold wolf tickets. I'll have to have a word with Mr. Chris Fields. I'll have to have a word with Mr. Omran Shaban. They were posting today. They were leading us astray. And the episode kicked off. We had the build up. We were going straight into it here. I was like, holy what's going on here? Normally we don't get a fight until the end of the episode, but they were building us up early into this episode, obviously with Shaban and Magomedov, like you said, a little bit of a strange dynamic. They were praying together, and they were getting along quite well. And it must be a strange dynamic when you kind of are hanging out with somebody and are friendly with someone, where you have to kind of flick that switch and get into fight mode. And you could see, like you said, when they were both outside at the start of the episode, there was that little bit of awkwardness between the two of them, wasn't there?
There was, yeah, and you are right about the wolf tickets. It is a weird position to be in as a fighter who has gone through the season and now you're out because you obviously can't talk about what happened in the house. So, everyone's anticipating this episode coming up for your big fight that we've been talking about for a week leading up to it. And you just kind of got to post slyly and be like, "Yep, tune in tonight, something big." And
Yeah.
then you're right when the episode started and they're getting right into the fight, I'm like, "Ooh, must be a quick finish. Maybe we're gonna get two fights in this episode. Let's see." And then all of a sudden, that Nevada State Athletic Commission representative came in and was like, "We need to see you guys outside real quick." I was like, "Oh
I knew something was
no!"
afoot. I knew
Right
something was afoot.
away, right
Yeah,
away. So what a shame.
it was a big shame. Look at obviously the fight between Omran Shaban and Magomedov, Shamakayan Magomedov off. The fight was off due to a medical condition. Obviously, Omran Shaban picked up a cold sore, was not cured in time for the fight. So the pre-fight medical, that's what pre-fight medicals are for, was spotted that the doctor said that he was not going to be able to compete Omran this week. The fight would have been pushed back. It said to next week, but we'll talk about next week's fight in a minute. But yeah, look, at disappointing. And I was thinking to myself, and I couldn't really remember, like, is this a tough first? But it's not a tough first. We had it happen last year as well. It happened to Trevor Wells on Team McGregor. So the curse of the cold sore strikes again in episode 2 of this season's Ultimate Fighter, Theo.
I hope we don't see this trend continue because honestly, I had the same reaction. I was like, I don't think this has ever happened before. Then it kind of just showed how little I watched of last season, to be honest with you. But, now that I think about it more, why has this happened in back-to-back tough seasons, but this hasn't happened at an actual event? I'm surprised this doesn't happen more, to be honest with you. I guess, like, the pre-fight medical screening happens, like, during fight week, so I guess they would stop it from happening before you actually get to the night of the event. But even still, like, we would hear about people having cold sores, so I was kinda surprised to see that it had happened twice in a row, back-to-back seasons, but, hopefully you're wrong. Hopefully it's not a curse afoot.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing, like, just pure speculation when it comes to it. Obviously, it is pretty contagious. You don't want to pass it to one fighter. You don't want to pass it to the rest of the house. If it was an outbreak on the house, multiple fights, and they're under a tight schedule there. Like, obviously, the season will run over 10 weeks, but it actually takes place over the course of like maybe 4 or 5 weeks within the house as well. So I think extra precautions are taken. But I'd say people have been let into like regular fight nights and pay-per-views with a hell of a lot worse. And I think, the shame about this particular one is, the guys had cut weight already. They had their hands wrapped and, they were just let down. Obviously, both very understanding. Obviously, Shaban, would have been disappointed. Magomedov, very understanding too. Two coaches, very understanding with one another. And look, at fighter safety has to come first, I guess, Theo. And it just turned out to be the case as well. Um, let's talk about the fight that was announced for this week then, and that was Giannis Bashar versus Robert Valentin. We'll get into that fight towards the end of here in the next 10 minutes or so. Um, but yeah, approaches for both coaches here seems to be different from what we've seen on the build up to this. Obviously, we got a little bit more in depth on the background of Gianni Bakar and Robert Valentin as well. Valentina Shevchenko is putting her team to work, Theo, isn't she? We didn't really get into too much the no water rule last week on the recap. For anyone who doesn't know about it, she does not allow her team to drink water during those training sessions. Um, and she goes absolutely hard. You could see Johnny Bashar struggling. Rudy Rhodes talks about crawling towards water and being dragged by his ankles away from the water during a training session. She runs a tight old ship, does Valentina, doesn't she? Yeah.
That's an understatement of the century, and she runs the tightest ship there's ever been. There's been a lot of pushback online, especially after the first episode, about Valentina's methods. Now, far be it from me to debate with someone at the caliber of Valentina Shevchenko on how you should help prepare people for these things. Um, but it is something that I've kind of enjoyed at this point, to be honest with you. How intense it is, how everyone just can't believe how Valentina's doing things like this. And while I might not agree with it, it makes for a fantastic television, and it's so dramatic. It's like, that shot of Giannis when he's just sort of crumpled up against the cage and Valentina gets back in his face. She's like, come on, I know this is hard, but we got to keep going. And she just cuts to the camera right away. And she's like, yeah, I have a tough sort of pace when I train. I started at 10 and I ended at 12, no breaks, no water, all this other stuff. It is a ruthless grind those guys are getting put through. But, I think it's making for some great TV, and I am kind of enjoying it, to be honest.
It is. I would probably like, from a mental perspective as well, build maybe some solidarity with your mental game too. In, when you're training, you're trying your best, and it is quite hard to replicate, the sacrifices that you make and the struggles that you go through in an actual live action fight. And by doing that, it kind of, might give her an edge, might not give her an edge. We'll talk about the fight in a little bit. A stark contrast on Alexa Grasso's kind of approach to coaching. Basically just telling her team, if you need anything, let us know. So allowing the fighters who know themselves, who know their traits, just being more of a support network for her team rather than, Valentina Shevchenko is getting in there, she's sparring, she's schooling with the guys. One of the teams said, she's going quite hard. Grasso, on the other hand, Theo, more of a hands-off approach, I should say.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with a more, laissez-faire approach to things. Connor did something similar last year where he kind of just like left them to the coaches of SBG. Not every fighter no matter the skill level, like not every fighter is going to be a great coach, and that's totally fine. And it's honestly better if they recognize it themselves and they sort of remove them from that situation. So, Alexa, while she's not as hands on as Valentina is, she's absolutely setting up her athletes to be in successful positions and, having the opportunity to win these fights. So, I've got no problem with it. I was a little surprised though, because it seemed like she was really looking forward to the opportunity of coaching. She said it was a lifelong dream of hers in episode one to be a coach. So I was a bit surprised to see she's not as involved, but I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that.
Absolutely. No, no, I wouldn't even be highlighting it to say there was anything wrong. Whatever works is whatever works. And obviously, she has the trust in her team. And, with the fighters too, like, I think, we have to remember, you know, they've got done years and years of preparation to get to this moment as well. And, you just kind of have to, be somewhat of a co-pilot and guide them in the right direction. Obviously, Valentina has her coaching methods as well. So, we'll see whoever's works better as the season progresses, I guess. Part two of the episode itself, it's kind of an outdoor team, Theo. I mean, Valentina Shevchenko taking the team out to the mountains, a bit of running, a bit of shadow boxing. They were picking up stones. She was warning the guys not to get bitten by scorpions and spiders out out in the open as well. But it was a kind of a tactic that did go well with the team. They seemed to get a good response. I noticed the body language here of Johnny Bashar as well wasn't that great on the lead up um, to this kind of training as well. And that could kind of be a trend that's going to progress as we get into the fight in a few minutes. But outside for training for Team Shevchenko, and it was outside sleeping for Robert Valentine, who took a unique approach. Probably the highlight of the episode, really, for me. Decides to sleep outside every night. Wants to be in touch with nature, and a very unusual individual, kind of a guy who's into the dark arts a little bit, spoke very openly about some of the struggles he has and tattoos and, inner demons, and using his inner demons as a benefit to him and not letting him consume him. Very, very unusual and interesting individual. Talk to me about the outside training of Team Shevchenko, and talk to me about the outside sleeping of Robert Valentine ahead of his fight. A decision that was met with some bemusement by the rest of the house.
Yeah, he's absolutely insane for doing that. In the Las Vegas desert is not a safe place to be sleeping outside, even if you are in a fenced-in backyard. Definitely not the best idea. You don't know what's going around, especially coyotes around nighttime. Um, but going back to the training outside for Team Shevchenko, I thought that it was a great choice because we highlighted how tough those training sessions were for her team and how intense they were. I think if you can change the environment, it sort of gives people a break from that stress, gives people a break from that intensity, and just changes things up. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think if you're going to do that, you might want to pick a spot that you have scoped out before and made sure that there are no scorpions or any sort of snakes that might bite your fighters and have another problem with the athletic commission. But I digress. I don't think it was that bad. And anything to change up the flow of training is a good thing in my opinion.
100%, yeah. And I think the point that you said there about a change up from a normal routine, that can add a bit of refreshment to, the fighters themselves, and it seemed to do that. You know, before we get into the fight, Robert Valentine, if he was to remind you of any kind of fighter, who would it be? I'm curious to hear if you're on the same line as what I'm thinking.
Oh, I mean, if you don't even look at his fight style, you just look at the personality that he put on display in this episode,
Yes.
he's 1000% Yuri Prochazka. It's
Oh, yeah,
the
you and me both,
same
man.
exact thing. Like he
Yeah,
didn't mention anything about samurais, but I would imagine he lives a very similar lifestyle to the samurai code. Very connected with the outdoors, obviously, something that Yuri likes to preach about a lot too. I think that guy lines up perfectly with Yuri, and I think they're both batshit insane. So,
absolutely delighted to hear you say that, because it was my exact thoughts as well. I mean, the man loves violence. Born in Switzerland, now training in Phuket in Tiger Muay Thai. Very, very interesting. Couple of tidbits before we get into the fight. Yanni Bachar comes in as the last pick on Team Shevchenko. Valentin himself mentioned he had 3 knee surgeries throughout his career, something that did lead to a couple of mental health issues for him as well. Talked about those hard times, and that's where I kind of noted when he was talking all that. He is a Yuri Prohachka type figure as well. I'm very intrigued about this guy, and I'm interested about his story. The fight itself, Theo. Um, who were you favoring before we get into the nitty gritty of the fight? Who were you favoring to win this fight before it happened?
So I know that Giannis came in here as the last pick of the selections. I don't think he's the worst guy in this crop, so I was kind of surprised to see him go that late because he is a multiple time kickboxing world champion. Not on the biggest stage, but it still counts for something. Um, so I was surprised to see him go that late just because of how refined his striking is. Had that being said, I had a little bit of an inkling that it might go Valentin's way just because, obviously he's a much better grappler than Giannis. So I thought that, he was going to use a lot of his judo that they're preparing in the lead up to that. But also they cut to Dana, and Dana said in like a weird way that he's really been improving on his striking. And that's something that I think he's going to show in this fight and stuff like that. And I thought that was interesting because from the research I did pre-fight, I didn't think that Giannis, or excuse me, I didn't think that Robert was, a very dangerous guy on the feet. I didn't think that he was going to pose many threats to Giannis in that area of the fight. Um, but regardless, when you see Giannis crumpled against the cage after a training session, when you see how his attitude kind of is to some of these training sessions and how much more nonchalant he is, just going through the motions of the house. I didn't love the way that he was approaching this fight. And so I did favor Robert, but I didn't anticipate it ending the way that it did.
No, nor did I, to tell you the truth. Bashar looked nervous ahead of the fight inside the cage. It was a thing, and it was a thing that kind of showcased throughout the episode. To be honest, that body language just wasn't really, where you would expect to see for a guy going in. I don't know where his head was at. The other thing, maybe because of the lack of self confidence, came with a huge size advantage to Robert Valentin as these guys got on the cage, and this may be a trend as the season progresses. Obviously, Yanni Bashar coming in as the Cage Warriors welterweight champion, fighting up at middleweight, weighed in at 184 pounds. Robert Valentin weighing in at 186, obviously cutting down there. He looked much bigger fighter when the fight kind of kicked off. Talk us through the fight. It didn't last too long, and that's the kind of trend here with the Ultimate Fighter as well, Theo. I mean, we're getting close to the end of the finish time. You kind of get an idea. It's like, oh, we're starting to run out of TV time here. You actually sent me a message before the fight happened. You were like, I reckon we're going to get a quick one here, and that's exactly what we got.
We did. Sub 20 seconds. I personally clocked it around 19 seconds. That's when it looked like the fight clock turned off, but I don't know what the exact official time was, but it was the first head strike that he landed of the fight. He landed one low kick before that and then just stepped in with a short elbow, put his lights out right away, ground and pound followed up. That was all she wrote. An absolute stunner of a result there. I think that also does huge favors for his stock going forward in this tournament. You know, like I was mentioning earlier, how Dana was saying that he has refined his striking and it's a big asset for him. If he can have a more well-rounded game like that and mix in the judo takedowns and mix in his ground control, which is I think his best asset, this guy is a problem for everyone at middleweight. So massive win for him, especially to do it in your first fight of the tournament. Get out without taking any shots against you, any damage. That's huge for him going forward.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more there. Very excited to see him progressing as the season and the tournament progresses through the episodes. With the fight, like you said, I think you described the finish perfectly. Calf kick, uh, kind of a throughout the jab, not really a probing jab, more of a distance control. Bashar rushes in onto a step in elbow from Valentin, put him down, 2 strikes, 3 strikes on the ground, and it was all over. Chris Dione steps in really quickly, kind of feeding into it, what we were thinking about Bashar, being a little bit nervous, possibly rushed it a little bit, maybe rather than showing that patience. But look, at these things happen. Very, very disappointing for him. You could see how devastating he was after the fight. Like, to go through all of the training, all the preparation, all the sacrifices of a career so far for a moment like this, for it all to be ended inside 20 seconds is very, very devastating as well. Hopefully he'll bounce back. We saw a snippet of next week. He doesn't seem to handle the loss all that well. Could be raising up the house drama meter with certain reactions, but we'll find out. We'll talk about that, of course, next week. But we do have a featherweight fight on tap for next week too. Theo, do you want to tell everybody? Do you want to break the news for anyone who hasn't seen yet?
Well, it is quite the matchup, actually. I am excited to see that it's going to play out. It's going to be my pick to win this tournament is Nate Fletcher versus our guy
Canolfi.
Conolfi. Yes, that's going to be a great fight. Those guys always go for the finish, and especially at that weight class 145. When you have two guys at the lower weight classes who have good cardio and they only have 2 rounds to work, the pace of this fight is going to be tremendous. And it's going to be guys who, like I said, are going to be going for the finish. So a lot of high risk, high reward I'm anticipating. I cannot wait to see how it plays out.
Nor can I. And we'll be back next week to suss out episode 3 and the happenings of episode 3. Hopefully no Wolf tickets this time around. Hopefully we get to see Omran Shaban in there in action sooner rather than later. Also have to mention 0 Paddy McCurry this week. Come on, give us more Paddy. We want to see more Paddy. Come on, guys. Not a peep of him in this episode. So here's hoping a little bit more Irish next week. But for now, at Theo Lander, at O'Neill MMA, that's where you'll catch us. We'll see you all next week for the recap of episode 3. Good luck.